Hello and welcome to another episode of the FemiNinja Project. And thank you so much for tuning in. As always, I really appreciate it. And as always, I have another fantastic guest with me today. Her name is Mary Giuliani. She is a trauma recovery and resilience coach, speaker, and author of the recently released book titled, It's Not About Food, Drugs, or Alcohol. It's About Healing Complex PTSD. It's a combination memoir, science-based research, and complex PTSD workbook and recovery guide. Mary has her own experience with complex PTSD, struggling and eventually recovering. And now she is on a mission to help other adult trauma survivors do the same. She is also dedicated to raising awareness regarding complex trauma and how to help survivors heal. Mary, thank you so much for being here and welcome to the show.
Well, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's an honor to have you on the show. And boy, do you have one heck of a story.
I know. And finally, it's out there. Wow, it's taken a long time, but
yeah,
finally
it has.
The pieces have come together for that to happen.
I'm really curious, once you decided that it was time to get the story out there. How was that? What was that experience like? Was it terrifying? Was it, liberating? What was it like?
Well, surprisingly, just to give you a feel for what happened is at 57 years old, I picked up a book. I'd been on this personal growth and recovery path for like 30 years. Mm-hmm. And so I'd been sober and, had lost over 100 pounds and kept it off and done all of this work on myself, on my family of origin issues. Mm-hmm. And I found a book on on one of my favorite podcasters' favorite books of the year of 2017 called The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. And it's the brain, mind, and body and the healing of trauma. And I didn't even think it would apply to me, since I always thought you had to have physical or sexual abuse to be considered a trauma survivor. Mm-hmm. But since I'm a total psychology geek and a coach, I thought, I just want to learn about this to see, what this is about, since I've seen a lot of books about it, just trauma and stuff coming out. So anyway, I'm actually listening on Audible, and this is like 5 years ago. Mm-hmm. And I'm like, oh my God, this is me. This is like, I'm hearing Bessel van der Kolk talk about how you don't have to have physical or sexual abuse to experience the level of chronic toxic stress that creates childhood trauma or complex PTSD, which is the same thing. Mm-hmm. You just have to be exposed to enough chronic toxic stress. And in my case, it was being raised by an alcoholic mom and parents there was a constant tension, and my mom raging at my dad a lot. And I was also an overweight kid because I coped with food. And so I was getting bullied at school. And also I came out to myself, at least, as a lesbian when I was like 15 years old in Catholic high school. So the whole trauma, and this is like in the 70s. So the whole trauma of homophobia. So anyway, I'm reading through this book and I'm just having one epiphany after another going, oh my God. The thing about this book is that it's science-based research. I mean, he's got brain scans showing kids mm-hmm. that were severely neglected, showing complete areas of their brain not even functioning or developing properly because of it. And it started explaining why I struggled with food, mm-hmm. Drugs and alcohol. And it was like, at first it was like a relief, like, oh my God, finally, I've got some clarity on, or some, a story that makes sense as to why I've struggled in the ways I did. And mm-hmm. even though I was in recovery and had lost all this weight, I was still struggling. I was still mm-hmm. struggling with food to some degree, with caffeine, with sleep, and with my relationships. And I had no idea that close personal relationships were also a classic symptom, difficulty with close personal relationships, mm-hmm. with complex PTSD. And so, I'm just really blown away about this book. And then I get to the point where he says, no amount of talk therapy can completely heal trauma. And I'm like, what? I mean, after 30 years, basically the only stuff I did was talk therapy or 12-step or whatever, and that you need body and brain and mind-based, therapies. So again, I'm like kind of pissed off because, the mental health community never even, like, I'd seen several therapists and psychiatrists over the years, and not one of them ever said, "Oh, Mary, you probably have some kind of a post-traumatic stress issue here with trauma." But none of them did. So I would have sought that out. So it was really maddening to feel like I was kind of failed by the mental health community. So I just got really obsessed with learning about childhood trauma and learning about what I needed to do to heal. So I spent 5 years really just immersed in studying everything I could about the brain, body, mind, attachment issues, relationship issues. And as I was going through this intense deep dive on understanding trauma and trying different ways to heal, I realized, oh my God, it was like I loved it. I was just enjoying the heck out of it, just learning about everything. And I realized this is the feeling, this is the signs that I used to read about when I read these Finding Your Purpose books and stuff, that you love what you're doing. You can't wait to get up in the morning to do it. It doesn't feel like work. And it was like, so not only was I healing my trauma, I found my purpose in knowing that I loved doing this research and loved sharing this research. And that's when it was like, I need to write a book about this journey. And so, especially since it was even not only just that I loved researching and learning and sharing the profound transformation I experienced from my own trauma healing, but it in many ways felt like a moral obligation. Like, here are all these people that are, even maybe they're sober, or maybe they're not, or maybe they're struggling with obesity, but they don't know that it's a symptom of trying to cope with a brain, body, and mind profoundly impacted by trauma, unhealed trauma. So it felt like, if I had gone through this, millions of other people had too. And so that's what got me on track for writing the book. And so here I am.
Okay, well, I'm really curious. Well, first of all, it kind of blows me away that nobody mentioned, hey, maybe you have PTSD, or maybe you've had some past traumas that you don't, you're not dealing with. That really blows me away. And almost I find it very disappointing because I would think that that would definitely be a red flag. The other thing is, you actually were a coach prior to this, or you're a psychologist or a therapist.
I've been a coach for 25 years. So I've had my nose to the ground on personal growth and healing, and I didn't even find out about it. I know.
That's just incredible.
I mean, I literally am like always reading a book about childhood, family origin stuff, attachment stuff. And I never even heard about it. And I had never even heard my friends or colleagues talking about it. Yeah.
Wow. That's amazing. And I actually had never heard the term complex PTSD. I heard it for the first time. Oh my gosh, I think it was about a year ago or so from one of my guests who was on the show, and she had complex PTSD. And I cannot imagine anything worse than complex PTSD, because I had what I would consider, through my research, a very simple form of PTSD. So, and I know what that was like going through that. So I couldn't imagine what complex PTSD would be like.
Yeah, it's a more severe form of PTSD. PTSD is typically a single incident trauma, like an assault or a car accident or war. Whereas complex PTSD, it occurs in the context of close relationships for long periods of time. And so, especially in child, I mean, it can happen as an adult, but typically it begins in childhood, where you're exposed to families where there's addiction, mental health issues, divorce, violence between parents, even emotional violence, not just physical. And so what's happening is a child's brain is in a developmental phase, and their psyche. And so it really impacts the developmental stages of their life. And so that's why it's so impactful. So it's definitely, well, and I think that I actually talk about the 12 reasons why people don't recognize their own or others' complex PTSD, because as you had mentioned, like my first question was, why hadn't I heard about this? And well, a few things. The term complex PTSD was coined by Judith Herman in like the late 80s, but it never made it to any of the official diagnostic manuals. It's only in the ICD-11, which is the World Health Organization manual, but it's not in the DSM, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Mental Health Professionals, which is the main manual that therapists use to figure out what they're going to diagnose their clients with and bill their insurance with. So it's delegitimized in that sense, and there's been a lot of attempts to get it into the DSM. So what happens is therapists are forced to use symptom-based diagnosis. Like in my case, I was diagnosed with generalized anxiety disorder, dysthymia, which is like a mild persistent depression, ADHD, binge eating disorder, and substance use disorders. Well, all of them were really a result of the changes that happened to my brain and body and mind because of trauma. Like trauma does impact the impulse, the frontal lobe, which is in charge of impulse control, which is in charge of emotional regulation. It's in charge of future planning. And so when you have those deficits, it's more difficult for you to rein in your impulses and your emotions. So you get upset easier. It takes longer to calm down. So a big part of healing trauma is working on healing the nervous system and learning and just a lot of different aspects.
So I want to clarify for the listeners, because when it's like you hear those words, healing the nervous system, that might be just really terrifying for some people to hear, but it can be done in such a gentle way. It's gentle and very subtle, I think, or it can be.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, if you think about it, like just a very simple example is one of the things I've struggled with is social anxiety. And so when I would go into a party, before I learned I had trauma, I didn't have this awareness about my body as much. I actually was sort of disconnected from my body, which is a way to protect yourself because it's too painful. But so anyway, now, well, when I first got into healing trauma, I would notice when I would go into a social, like a party, I would tense up. I could feel the tension, and that's my nervous system in action, going into protection mode. I would want to head for the food table to sort of soothe myself with food, or I'd have the impulse to leave soon, or I'd go into the bathroom or whatever, just to kind of avoid my discomfort. So healing the nervous system, actually Bessel van der Kolk has I love the way he describes this, is that the trauma lives not just in your mind or in your thoughts, but it lives in the body and the nervous system. And so what you need to heal is you have to have a visceral experience that contradicts what you normally experience. So in other words, you need to, like in my case, having a safe experience with people that I normally wouldn't, and having that viscerally impact my body to where I could relax is a corrective reparative experience. And so a lot of what I talk about in my book is how to actually intentionally create corrective experiences for your body, brain, and mind. And a big part of healing the trauma stuff is just understanding that that's why you've struggled. So like even the thing about the trauma stuff is complex PTSD is really a set of symptoms. So for some people, it's using, overeating or overdoing drugs or alcohol. But for other people, they cope and they adapt by overworking or by scrolling on their phone all day or by gaming or porn or whatever it is to regulate their nervous system. Because here's the thing, the nervous system of a trauma survivor is typically what they call hyper aroused, which is anxious, agitated, just uncomfortable, or hypo aroused, which is kind of dead, tired, spacey. And so what we're trying to do with this healing is to bring it back into balance, which is called the window of tolerance, and where you just feel a sense of ease and well-being. And And so the point is that when having complex PTSD is sort of like having a thermostat that's not working. Like when you have a thermostat that works, your house is pretty comfortable. When the heat needs to come on, it does. When the air conditioning comes on, it does. So you don't ever really get too hot or too cold. But with complex PTSD, you have a broken thermostat. And so the goal of healing trauma is to fix it by doing different body and brain and mind-based treatments and therapies and practices.
A couple of things I just find so fascinating as you were describing, the diagnosis and what is it, DSM, whatever. Yeah. And how the practitioners that you were going to for help, they were actually listing your symptoms.
Right. Yep.
And it was very clear, those are symptoms, not a cause.
Exactly.
And I think that happens way too often, not only in, mental health, but in, the medical field in itself, is that we focus so much on the symptoms that we forget there's a cause.
Exactly. And then on top of that, since I did a lot of research about addiction and just the views on addiction too in our culture and obesity, and sadly, 50% today of our population believe that addiction or obesity is a choice. And therefore, it makes sense why there's not a lot of initiatives going through to help get down to the cause. Because the thing is when you're a trauma survivor, you're not on a level playing field from a nervous system or impulse control standpoint as somebody who had a good enough normal or somewhat normal childhood. You're operating with a nervous system that's very, like I said, hyper, just very volatile. And when you're any human being, any organism, when it's uncomfortable or when it senses threat, it's going to do what it needs to do to survive and feel protected. And so and that's a big reason why I wrote the book too, is I wanted to raise awareness about this because a big reason, actually, not the number one reason people don't go into recovery with food or obesity or addiction is because of shame and stigma, because they feel like, it's my own fault, I'm weak, I'm a failure, and unlovable or broken. And the truth is that a lot of practitioners view C-PTSD, complex PTSD, as like a neurological injury. It's not something that you developed on your own. It happened to you. And so a big part of the healing is like having self-compassion. It wasn't your fault. And you can heal, and just as a side note, this is not about blaming parents. I mean, it's also not about minimizing what parents did or didn't do. It's about understanding what happens to a human being when they're exposed to chronic toxic stress and how to heal. Because if we can't heal what we don't see. And so, yeah.
Well, it changes the neural pathways in your brain.
Yes, exactly.
But you can reverse that.
Exactly. So the brain is plastic, or they call it neuroplasticity. So with the right treatments and practices and lifestyle, you can change it to where you're calmer, you're able to maintain a sense of well-being much easier than you would before you got into recovery. And so that's the biggest promise. But what's so interesting is just learning that all of these struggles that I had, the thing about my past, okay, so after I lost 160 pounds, kept it off, was sober all these years, but I had so much shame about even having struggled with it. I didn't want to share it on a professional level. So even though I was a coach, it was like I was at a place in my life where it was like, okay, I'm done feeling bad about myself. I look normal now. I just want to go on with my life and be a coach. And yet I just still had shame about ever even having struggled with them, because on some level, I still believed it was my own fault. And people would judge me for being weak or a failure or whatever. And so now that I can prove, I mean, literally, there's a study called the ACE study, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, that I go deeply into in the book, that literally proves that people with high levels of adversity in childhood have like 700% more chance of becoming alcoholics or abusing drugs or becoming obese. So this isn't just, an idea, it's scientific proof, the link between childhood trauma and addiction and obesity and even depression and anxiety. And so having that empirical proof was what helped me finally let go of the shame. And now I don't have shame about it. It's like, it wasn't my fault. I mean, it would be like, it would be like blaming myself for being in an accident when I was 3 years old, So now, and so just letting go of the shame of feeling like there's something wrong with you or that you're weak or a failure or broken is huge. I mean, to me, it's like 40% of the recovery, and so, and what they call that in the trauma healing world is creating a new coherent narrative. So, and a lot of actually Pete Walker, who wrote the book Healing Complex PTSD from Surviving to Thriving, talks about how, to the degree that a survivor can have a compassionate narrative about what happened to them and why they are, struggled the way they have, is to the degree that they'll heal. And so today I have compassion for myself. I mean, I'm like, anybody would have, responded the way you did. And you're alive and you're healthy, and you need to share the story with the world.
I really want to highlight the fact that you are healthy, because you just, you're the picture of health and vitality. And that brings me to another point when you were talking about the symptoms of C-PTSD and, the anxiety, the stress, and of course, the change in your neurology, your neurological system. That made me wonder about physical ailments as well, because I know that like autoimmune disorders are actually like, running rampant in our society. And I'm thinking of a particular individual, a young woman that I know, who I think had a really traumatic childhood, a lot of verbal and emotional abuse, and I witnessed it. And now she has just this laundry list of autoimmune, disorders, as well as severe obesity, and just cannot lose weight. So I'm thinking, I know the answer to this question, but just for the audience, how this impacts our physical health as well as our mental health.
Well, this is a great point you bring up, because the ACE study, Adverse Childhood Experiences Study, that was the whole point of the study. Was in 1998, they polled 17,000 members of Kaiser Permanente. Excuse me, this study was done between the CDC and Kaiser Permanente. So they polled 17,000 members of the health plan Kaiser and asked them 10 questions about whether they experienced what they experienced before they were 18 years old in childhood. Like the most common adversities: being raised by an alcoholic or drug addicted parent, being raised by a parent with depression, anxiety, or other mental health issues, experiencing emotional abuse or emotional neglect. And emotional neglect is very, very underground. It's basically when a parent doesn't acknowledge your emotions or minimizes them as something that you shouldn't have or shames you over. Also, physical or sexual abuse, of course. Parents divorcing or separating. A parent going to prison. So I don't know if I named all 10, but anyway, the point is they asked these 10 questions, and the purpose of the study was to see if the numbers of adversity, they call them ACE. So each category counts as one ACE, adverse childhood experience. And they wanted to see if the higher number of ACEs correlated with poorer health or social outcomes in adulthood. And the results were stunning. I mean, it was like, as I shared with before, if you have 4 or more, which is considered a high-risk ACE score, you have like 700% higher chance of becoming an alcoholic. But you also have, I'm not sure exactly what it is for heart disease, cancer, all these other issues as well. And autoimmune, the autoimmune issue is, for every point your ACE score rises, the chances of you developing an autoimmune disorder rise 20%. So, and the reason at first I'm like, okay, well, I can understand why people with a lot of adversity would turn to drugs or alcohol or food, because it's just a coping mechanism, to soothe themselves or whatever. But how does the illness stuff correlate? And what I learned is that the reason people get sick with high levels of adversity or trauma is because the nervous system has to stay in this chronic state of fight, flight, freeze. And that pumps a lot of cortisol into the body. And if there's too much cortisol, it impacts the immune system, which causes, if you don't have an immune system on your side fighting different things, you're going to get sick. And so another way, I think the analogy that I found the most helpful, it's like going through life with a high ACE score is like driving a car that's only designed to go a maximum of 60 miles an hour, but driving it at like 90 miles an hour. Eventually, when you run any kind of organism or machine over its operating capacity, it's going to break down, get sick, or die early, And so it's sort of like as when you're running around with an unhealed trauma with high adversity, that's what happens, and it's tragic, but it's treatable. And so, I mean, another reason people get sick with ACEs is because of the high risk coping behaviors, like in my case, food, drugs, alcohol, cigarettes. And fortunately, I was able to stop those when I was in my late 20s. I got sober, and then I had weight loss surgery in my at 42, and I was able to lose my weight and keep it off. And the thing about the weight loss surgery, I always like to throw this in there. Some people might think, okay, well, that's why you're able to lose your weight and keep it off. The reality with gastric bypass surgery is that about 50% of people after 10 years will gain 50% of their weight back. And it's clearly because they haven't dealt with the core issue, the complex PTSD. So whether you use a traditional nutrition, diet, exercise program, or weight loss surgery or whatever, if you don't deal with the trauma, you're going to need to use that coping mechanism. And so anyway, yeah, it's very tragic. And it's the reason why I believe so many people aren't even aware of the ACE study, and this was like 20 years ago, is because there's so much, anytime you bring up a topic that's going to correlate the way parents parented, it's a hot topic. It's an emotionally triggering topic, because most parents already feel guilty about the way they parented their kids. But if we can step back from it and just go, okay, so my parents parented me the way they were parented. Doesn't mean I need to minimize it. Doesn't mean I need to not feel the pain or the anger. But just recognizing that, then we can, take a clearer look at how we can heal. But if we, aren't willing to even look at it, or all the shame stuff around addictions, and then nothing changes, so.
Very well put, because a lot of times we really don't know or don't fully understand what our parents might have gone through as they were growing up.
Right, exactly. I mean, my mom was raised, she was born in the 30s, Great Depression, and ended up having a baby out of wedlock as a Catholic, and got flown. Her parents back then, this is like in the mid 50s, there was so much shame for her family around that they flew her to she was in Massachusetts, flew her to California to give the baby up for adoption. And then she never saw the baby again. And she didn't even want to give up this baby. I know. And so, she had met my dad like a year after she had the baby. So she still had the opportunity to keep it, even though it was already with a potential adoptive parent. But my dad didn't want to raise the baby as his own, because he felt like it would remind my mom of her ex-partner. And so she carried that. My mom carried that for all those years. and and then became an alcoholic, in her late 20s. And so all that pain just got transferred. And you know and that's the thing about trauma is, and her mother, by the way, was an orphan. My grandmother was, her mother died in childbirth. So
Wow.
so that trauma of my grandmother not getting that kind of bonding and attachment with her own mother, trickling down to my mom with her own stuff with her parents, and then the whole baby thing, adoption, losing her child, and then my dad not accepting it. So it, I didn't learn that till I was about 16. And it gave me a deeper level of compassion for my mom. But at the same time, she was so crazy with her drinking and raging at my dad, and just making life a living hell for our family, that it was hard to kind of hold both things at the same time. But it just shows that trauma will trickle down through the generations unless you heal it.
Absolutely. Wow, what a story.
Yeah.
Did you ever get to a point with your mother that you actually talked about your childhood, or, what was your relationship like as you were a maturing adult? Let's put it that way.
Well, the thing with my mom was I did a lot of, after I got sober in 87, I also got into Codependence Anonymous and started working on healing my codependent issues, because I was raised to believe that I should put my mother's and other people's needs first, or as a bad person. And so, yeah. And so I had to really learn to set a lot of boundaries. So going to CODA was like a lifesaver for me. I remember sitting in a CODA meeting and somebody sharing, oh, I said no to my mom and I didn't feel guilty. And it was like, oh my God, that can happen, And so I guess what I want to say about my relationship with my mom was tenuous, because I wasn't willing to engage in her dysfunction. I mean, it got to the point where she would call me and, drunk at night. And eventually I had to change my number and had no contact for a while, but then she came back in. So it was a very difficult relationship. And that's the thing. When you have a parent that is really, really sick with their own mental health, with alcoholism, sometimes, you're not going to get that kind of, closure or whatever. I think what, for me, I found a lot of their support through AA. When I joined in the late 80s, I found a sponsor that was sort of like a sober mother figure for me. And she invited all of her sponsees once a week for dinner at her house. So every Monday night I would go to her house, and she was sort of like, really helped me just navigate my life as a newly sober person. So yeah, my mom, it was very painful, but it is what it is. And she passed away at 72 of colon cancer. So she's been gone now for about 15 years.
Wow.
Yeah. And she never, got sober, or, but the way I look at my mom's life is, now that I understand trauma, her being in her skin was so horribly painful that there's just, alcohol was the only thing that gave her any kind of relief. So it makes sense. It doesn't minimize what she did to my family and me, but it still makes sense why she felt the need to do it.
Do you have any siblings?
I do. I have one sister.
Do you talk about this?
We don't.
Okay. That's interesting.
Again, family dynamics are different for every family. And I'm the let's talk about everything kind of person. And not everybody feels comfortable with that. I mean, if you think about it, if you open that door, it's going to probably bring up some really uncomfortable things that you haven't dealt with. I mean, I've been steeped in personal growth and therapy since I've been in my 30s, and not everybody's into that. And not everybody's even ever been to therapy, or, so
Yeah, I have one sister. It's like, I don't want to talk about it. I don't want to, don't tell me anything. Don't tell me anything. And then she
Yeah,
blabs everything on social media. And it's like, well, okay,
yeah.
that's your way of dealing with stuff. That's fine. But yeah, I have 4 sisters. So there were 5 of us girls in the family.
Oh my goodness, yeah. So yeah, and a big part of my healing is just recognizing that, we both grew up in the same family
Hmm.
and everybody has their stuff, and I'm
Hmm.
just trying to do my life to the best of my ability. And we have a relationship. It's just not like that
Hmm.
sisterly
Hmm.
connection kind of thing.
Well, it is interesting. Like I said, there are 5 of us, and there are 5 completely different upbringings,
Yeah,
and the memories are so different. It's like, I don't remember that. And
yeah.
especially there were 3 of us born in 4 years.
Oh
So
my God, yeah.
imagine that. Yeah. But it's so funny, we were raised exactly the same way, nothing was different, but the personalities are just
Mhm.
so different. But I guess that's, who wants to be the same?
Well, what's interesting? I started looking at, like, okay, well, why didn't my sister, develop an issue with alcohol or drugs or food or whatever? And one of the things I learned with the ACE study is that there's this thing called protective factors that can offset a high ACE score.
Mm,
And one of those, like, is having a close friendship or adult relationship with somebody that can be there for you.
mhm,
And so when I thought about my situation, like, my mom's alcoholism was like probably at its peak when I was about 15, 16.
mhm,
And at the time, my sister had a boyfriend that she spent a lot of time with. And
mm,
so she had that protective factor of being
mhm,
able to, he had a car and they could go away, and I was trapped in the house. Also, another thing, another level of stress that she didn't experience that I did was the shame and the bullying of being an overweight kid.
mm,
So that was a level of stress that put my nervous system at a different level, as well as the
mhm,
homophobia of being a lesbian.
mhm,
So between that, I mean, although, everybody has their way of coping, and I won't go into all of that, but the point
mhm,
is that the same kids can come, you can be raised in the same house, but depending on the level of stress with parents when a certain child is born, or protective
mhm,
factors that some have, or more stress that others have, and just, like temperament levels. Some kids are
mhm,
more sensitive, and
mhm.
so yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so much more complicated than we think it
Right.
is, or we like to think it is, maybe. So there's another thing that I saw in your profile that I thought was really fascinating, is that you are a singer and songwriter.
Yes, I am. So how the music came around. Actually, my mom inspired me to sing, and she loved singing when I was growing up and playing records, and she had a great voice. And so she used to coach me on singing and stuff. So after I got sober, I had actually took guitar lessons when I was like 17, but by the
Mhm,
time my drinking really took off, I kind of let that go. So
mhm,
when I got sober at 27, I ran into a friend in recovery, and that was doing music, and I got so inspired that I started playing my guitar and singing again, and started doing these gigs. And then there was a bunch of different people that I learned, like, hung out with, and some of them were writing songs, and I got inspired by that, so I started writing songs, and I recorded an album of my original songs, and it's on my website. It's on. It's I actually, it was originally recorded as a cassette because it was like 1990 or something, and then Wayne Dyer, how he would
mhm,
say, "Don't die with your music still in you."
mhm,
Well, I thought, okay, about 4 years, 5 years ago, I thought, okay, I'm going to follow his lead with this and get this analog cassette transferred into a digital format and have
mhm,
it up on Spotify and iTunes and Amazon Music. So it's up there. So anybody that subscribes to those can listen to it. It's called, it's under my name, Mary Giuliani. And the title of the album is I'm Showing Up for My Dream. And it's really songs about healing and transformation. And what's interesting about the music is when I look back at the music now, all of these songs are really about the longing for love and connection.
mhm,
And it really speaks to how that was really missing because of the emotional abandonment of growing up in the home that I grew up in, and just trying to heal that and recover from that. So yeah.
Yeah, that was my follow-up question, was as you were writing the songs and going through that, was it a, therapeutic exercise?
Totally.
Was it very healing? Because I think it would be.
Oh, totally. And I mean, my songs came out of my journaling, you know?
Mm.
So
Mhm.
I'd be journaling about something, and then my friend taught me how to put a melody to a song. And so, yeah, in fact, in my early recovery, just being able to pick up my guitar and play was a really healthy outlet instead of using drugs or alcohol.
Mhm.
So it was a really healing experience.
In my personal experience, I feel like tapping into that creative side of myself,
Hmm.
just, it just helps turn things around. It's, find something that you love to do. It's something that really fills your heart with joy. For
Hmm.
me at the time, it was ballet, which,
Hmm.
I started dancing very late in life at the age of like 19 or 20, which is late for ballet. I still dance to this day.
Hmm.
But it was something that just really helped ground me and just really, again, it filled my heart with joy. And when I was in ballet
Hmm.
class, it was like nothing else mattered. And I've talked to a
Hmm.
lot of other people that would say, for them, it was going outside and playing in the dirt, a grown
Yeah.
woman, and, just going back to things that really make you happy, coloring in a coloring book. Sometimes it's surprising, some of the stories that I heard.
Well, yeah, I completely agree. I mean, and what's interesting about the music and the ballet is they're both combining body, you know, and so like with music for singing, the breath, the emotions. With ballet, I've never done ballet, but just being able to be fully present in something.
Mhm.
Another thing that was really powerful for me in my early recovery was making friends with a lot of sober women. And
Mm.
we would get together every single weekend, many times a week at meetings and stuff, and we'd go on bike rides
Mm.
and talk and have lunch. And so having a group of safe people that you can hang out with and feel safe with that are on a similar path, to
Mhm.
me was everything,
Mhm.
and and it kept me sober, and it kept me on a healthy track. And yeah.
Yeah,
So,
there's nothing worse than feeling isolated and alone.
right. Well, and especially with trauma, because if you're not around people that are open or understand it,
Mhm.
you're very likely to get re-traumatized by people. A
Mhm.
lot of people that will be victim shaming, oh, get over your past, or,
Yep.
you stop blaming your parents. And what I say to that is, if you don't have any issues that are holding you back in life, then you don't need to work on trauma. But if you
Mhm.
do, you clearly haven't, moved on from whatever it is, and you need to work on
Mhm.
it if you want to have a life that you love.
I'd like
So,
I'd like to add to that when you're talking about, the shaming or the get over it or whatever.
mhm.
Also the friend that just denies that it ever happened, call you a liar or you're making it up. If you're around somebody like that who's absolutely just re-traumatizing you, you need to get them out of your life.
Absolutely, absolutely, boundaries and standards. I mean, yes.
Yeah. The world
And
is not
but
going to end.
Well, and the thing that I found is, before you start, you know, letting people out of letting people go, you do need to build a support system of safe people first, because if you don't, it's going to be really hard not to cave back into that, because
Mhm.
our attachment to people is really a strong, impulse, and
Mhm.
even if it's unhealthy, it's going to pull you back in. So
Mhm.
it's so important to go to, even if you go to online meetings, or find a group of healthy people that you can feel safe sharing all of you and not feel shamed or judged.
Mhm.
Yeah, because,
Mhm.
yeah, I totally agree.
Absolutely. I found it interesting too that you mentioned the bike rides. There's an organization here in Colorado, and I can't remember. I think they're based out of Lakewood, but it's called Sacred Cycle,
Ooh,
and it's
cool.
for women, who've been sexually traumatized, and it helps them, regain their power through mountain biking.
Oh, how nice. I love that.
Yeah,
Perfect.
It's wonderful. They actually invited me to teach a class for them, not on mountain biking.
I'm gonna write that down. Sacred cycling.
Cycle. And I taught a class for them. I don't know if you've ever heard of Feldenkrais.
I have, yes.
Yeah, I'm a Feldenkrais practitioner. So I actually taught a workshop for them last summer. I hope they invite me back because I really enjoyed it.
That's awesome. And I love that you're doing this kind of body work, because that's what helps heal trauma, is getting into the body where the nervous system has stored things and the body has stored things, and just, and that's I think one of the tragedies about our culture is that we still have this disconnect between the mind and the body. And, we think, before I learned about C-PTSD or complex trauma, I just thought it was like, you had difficult childhood, and so you either needed therapy or medication or something. I didn't know it was like a nervous system thing. And it wasn't. And the other thing I didn't know is I used to think it was just, having the uncomfortable or distressing memories of something. Well, what I learned, it was so interesting, is having complex PTSD isn't really so much about memories. It's about how you relive the sensations of those experiences in your present day when you are reminded of them. So, for example, in my case, my mom would get drunk and rage at my dad for hours until like 3 or 4 in the morning. So when I hear, for like almost a decade. So when I hear adults arguing, I can go into a trauma response, and what's happening is I'm reliving that experience of when I was a child and had to witness that. And so the same sensations and even sometimes the thoughts, but now I'm aware of it and I'm able to regulate myself. So the point is that we relive the sensations and the thoughts versus just having memories of the thoughts. And that's why it's so important to heal, because it's present in your everyday life. And even in relationships, so I write about this in the book. If you don't understand another big breakthrough for me reading that Body Keeps Score book is childhood trauma is relational trauma. So because it happens in the context of close family relationships. And so this is why people with these kinds of histories of trauma have difficulty with close relationships, because they bring up the triggers of those bodily sensations and thoughts of not feeling safe or comfortable with close relationships. So like in a romantic relationship, what I found is, before I learned I had trauma, if I would, typically we attract the level of history that we are. So I would attract people with my same level of trauma history. And instead of realizing that 90% of our conflicts were us being in trauma triggers, we really thought that it was either, we'd blame each other or ourselves, but never really got down to the core issue, which is I'm in a trauma trigger. And so we would break up. And so now I understand when I've been in my relationship with my partner, Maria, for 5 years, and she understands complex PTSD. And so when I get any hint that she's distant or, like I might be abandoned, I go into a trauma trigger. And so, but I understand what that is now. So I'm not blaming her. I'm able to talk to her about it, and she's compassionate. And so it's been really healing. But before learning I had trauma, I might be you're just not emotionally available, or, and then she'd be like, you're smothering me, or, you know what I mean? Now we understand the dynamics and we're able to be there for each other. So it's so tragic, so many relationships end because people aren't aware that they're in a trauma triggered state, and they can find ways to, heal and not lose their relationship over it.
So now, is this something that you include in your coaching practice? And
Yes.
Tell us more about your coaching.
Sure. Well, I've been a life coach for over 20 years. I earned my master certified coach through the International Coaching Federation in 1999. And so when I learned so I'd been doing personal and business coaching for almost 20 years when I learned about trauma.
Mhm.
And so once I learned about complex PTSD, I transitioned from working with all types of clients to just working with adult trauma survivors that are wanting support in either doing the work they love, finishing their book on healing or their project, or people that are struggling with food, substances, or relationships. So as a coach, a trauma and resilience coach, I focus on helping them implement healing practices and find therapies that are trauma-based, and how to interact with people in their life in a way that creates healthy relationships, how to set boundaries, how to raise standards, how to, just interact in ways that foster health and healing and wellness.
Mhm. I'm guessing you work with people online.
Yes, it's
As
either Zoom or phone calls.
okay, great. So how can people get a hold of you?
Well, my website is Mary Giuliani, that's GIULIANI.net. That's .net.
Mhm.
And there's actually a free complex PTSD quiz on my website. You'll see it right away. You can
Mhm.
do that. Um, Also, I have all the videos of my previous interviews, and I'll put this interview on there.
Mhm. Thank
And
you.
also my book. I mean, to me, my book is like a compilation of 30 years of my healing journey, my recovery from drugs, alcohol, and food. I include everything I've done to maintain my 160-pound weight loss and my recovery with alcohol and drugs and C-PTSD. So there's a
Mhm.
workbook with quizzes and questionnaires. And so it's on Amazon.com. Right
Mhm.
now, Amazon has put the Kindle ebook version on sale for just 99 cents, believe it or not. And then there's the paperback version. So just go to Amazon.com and search for either Mary Giuliani, Giuliani, or It's Not About Food, Drugs, or Alcohol. It's About Healing Complex PTSD.
Mhm. Excellent. And of course, all of those links are going to be in the show notes forever and ever. So people will be able to find you. Let me see what else. Oh, yes, about your website. You also have some amazing pictures on your website. You as a child and after you've lost weight, gained weight. So you're very real, genuine, authentic, open, and honest about your journey.
Well, thank you. Yeah, I thought it was so important because you get to see the journey of me being a 7-year-old little chubby girl
Mhm.
to a 14-year-old at 200 pounds to then losing 80 pounds and then being over 300 pounds at 27. And then, I mean, so I've lost and gained hundreds of pounds several times,
Mhm.
but thankfully I've been able to maintain my 160-pound weight loss for 20 years. And I never thought I would ever finally get beyond the war with food, weight in my body, but I can say I have. And I want to help other people achieve that.
Mhm. And congratulations on your success, because it is an incredible journey. Sometimes I think when people see the end result, they think, well, of course, look at her. It was easy for her. She looks fantastic. And like I said, you are the picture of health and vitality. And just
Yeah.
briefly, what I would like for you to do, just for people who are watching the video, I mean, it's very clear you can see your book in the background, but if you just wanted to
Oh,
pick it up and
oh,
do a
sure.
little bit of a, close up. Oh, it's a beautiful book.
Let me just turn this away so it's not so.
Yep. Very nice.
Yeah.
Very, very nice.
Yeah.
Congratulations on that.
Thank you. Yeah, it's been a labor of love, and so grateful I can finally share my story and what's worked for me to create a life I love with
Mhm.
the work I love, with a partner I love, and with health and wellness. So
And you are helping a tremendous amount of people out there. I know it. And that is just going to continue. So thank you for the incredible work that you're doing.
you're welcome. Well, thank you for what you're doing too. It's awesome. So
Oh,
thanks
thank
so
you.
much. Okay.
It was wonderful having you on the show, Mary, and I really appreciate it.
Well, I do too. Have a great day, and thank you so much. And thanks everyone for watching or listening.
And everybody, yes, thank you for listening. And please do go to Mary's website. It is a beautiful site. You can see her pictures. You can download her music, check out her book. Obviously, she's an incredible person. If you are struggling with what you even might think might be Complex PTSD, contact her and see if she can help you. Or if you know if somebody else is struggling, it's really important to get help, because you can have the life that you love and the life that you deserve. And that is the way of the FemiNinja.